You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to The Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and it's time again, Tuesday morning, bright and early. We're diving into power rankings following week number 8 of the NFL. The rankings you're seeing on the screen are last week's rankings, so I invite you all to comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions on this past weekend's games. Make sure you dive in. Give me some of your rankings if you want to do 32-1. If you want to just give me your top 10, your top 5, top 3, whatever it may be. We're going to go ahead. We're resetting the screen. We're going to start and work our way from the bottom all the way up to the top through our tier list, beginning with the number 1 overall Contenders category, and sitting at the very bottom to start the group at number 32, we are looking at the Tennessee Titans sitting at 1-6, the Panthers at 31, the Saints at 30, the Jets at 29, Patriots at 28, and the Jaguars at 27. So the Tennessee Titans, Titans fans, I'm praying for you. That's basically where I stand with you all at this current point here. This is one of those seasons that is quickly turning into a let's start looking towards the draft. Let's start looking towards free agency and how this team improves going into next season. It feels like there is going to be, on the roster side of things, a fairly decent reset going on as they continue to build out there in Tennessee, but there is just not a whole lot to take away from in terms of just positive outlook when your opponent dumps over 50 points on you. It's not really something you can be proud of. It's not really something that you can, look between the lines and maybe find a positive here or there. This is a Titans team following the moving on from DeAndre Hopkins. Feels like they almost waved the white flag in this one. They were competitive, at least for a little portion early in that game. The game was somewhat tight, and then it just felt like one thing led to another. The Lions kept scoring, and nobody could do a damn thing about it from Tennessee's end. At 31, the Panthers, Bryce Young started hot. Social media went ablaze, opening drive, scoring a touchdown. It was a nice little thing to see. And then that was kind of the gist of it until late in the game here. Couple of tough interceptions. You got the touchdown late that didn't really matter. The defense allowed Bo Nix to have the best game of his young career to this point in the season. And the Panthers, another one of those teams, very much looking towards the offseason and just how this team is going to improve going into next year, sitting at 1-7. I opted to give them a bump here for at least staying a little bit more competitive than Tennessee did against Detroit. The Panthers have at least one thing they can hang their hat on over Tennessee, and that's not having allowed more than 50 points in the game. They got pretty close with the 40 they allowed last week, but they at least haven't allowed 50 to this point here, so we'll give the Panthers some credit there. The Saints at number 30. This one, plain and simple, is just the injuries that have completely decimated this team from top to bottom, especially on the offensive side of things. I mean, the O-line, the wide receiver room, not having Derek Carr. You're relying on Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener to try to put something together for this offense here. And I really feel for the Saints because you started out 2-0, and it was exciting, dropping over what felt like over 40 points the first couple of games of the season. And you're rolling, and then from then on, things start to get shaky. The O-line gets hurt. The injuries start to pile up. The wide receiver room, again, Derek Carr. The offense is just flatlined to this point here, and until Derek Carr gets back, there's not really a lot of positive you can take away from the offense, and the defense is basically just at the mercy of whatever the offense is doing to them in terms of positioning and just how many times they're going to see the field and how quickly they're going to see the field. So until this offense even gets somewhat healthy, the Saints team is just going to keep trending down further and further, and at this point for me, they're sitting at number 30. Jets at 29, sitting at 2-6. Since Robert Saleh's firing, 85 points allowed, 0 defensive takeaways, and 134 yards rushing per game. You also go and you trade for Devontae Adams, and in the 2 games that he has played and reunited with his quarterback Aaron Rodgers, he has caught a whopping 7 receptions for 84 yards and was basically shut down by Christian Gonzalez this past weekend, being allowed to catch 1 ball when Gonzalez was in his coverage. I don't know where this Jets team goes from here because they are way too talented as far as the roster construction is concerned for this team to be where they're currently sitting at 2-6 at this current point here, dropping a game to the Patriots that they blew out. 24-3. If you want to call that a blowout, you still win by 3 scores, but I mean, you dominated from start to finish. And yeah, it's a slightly different situation because Drake May started the football game, but Drake May did get knocked out in that game, and there's no real reason for what's going on in New York other than the Jets are gonna Jets, and it's kind of crazy. I mean, you have Bill Belichick weekly calling out Woody Johnson and stating how it starts with the ownership ripping them a new one weekly. I know the New York media has had a lot to say as well. I don't really know where this Jets team goes right now, but they do not feel like a team in the sense, and it really does not feel like it's going to get much better from here on out. They got a short week this week with the Texans coming up, and I would brace for impact if I'm a Jets fan. The Patriots right above them at 28 here. Resiliency was the big thing that was talked about post-game in the press conferences by the players, by head coach Gerard Mayo. I do think that the Patriots do need some credit, considering the media storm that was going on this past week in regards to the Gerard Mayo calling his team soft comments, that whole situation, for the team to kind of hunker down, get their minds right. And a lot of players are even kind of calling each other out without calling each other out directly, but still mentioning that, there are players on this roster that essentially think too highly of themselves was kind of the message being brought out by a lot of guys. It was nice to see in a game like this where, I mean, your season's essentially over at this point. No one really expects a ton from the Patriots, but, at this point, your integrity is kind of being put on the line in this game here. And then you have Drake May go down, and the team could have essentially sank and folded over at that point, because once Drake May went down, I'll be honest myself, I'm watching this game go down as it's happening, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that does it for New England today. You're going to pretty much put the game away at this point if you're New York, but they battle through. They still get the job done. They still win, through the help of some of the mistakes the Jets made along the way. But ultimately, they get the job done. They get their second win, and they're halfway to their win total of last year at the very least. So we will see where the Patriots go from this point forward. But I will say resiliency, definitely the big word coming out of this one. And then the Jaguars sitting at number 27 at 2-6 themselves. You really do have to wonder just how much longer Doug Peterson has left as the Jacksonville Jaguars head coach. You lose to a Jordan Loveless Packers team that ultimately had to go to Malik Willis, who stepped in and did a solid job for them. Injuries at the wide receiver position are also mounting and could pose a problem for you in the coming weeks here. It feels like the storm is brewing. Peterson may have bought himself some time last week with the win that they had over the Patriots and in fairly dominant fashion on top of that. But in a situation where the opposing team loses their starting quarterback and you still can't come out with a victory, we just kind of nailed the Jets for the same situation. You can kind of give it to the Jaguars as well, although Packers better team overall, so there is that. But I will say that you get yourself in a situation where the opposing team starting quarterback gets taken out of the game, you should be winning that football game. You should be. Talent aside, that is supposed to be kind of like the death blow to any team, and for Jacksonville was not enough. Their defense continues to struggle, and we are again at 2-6 now with Jacksonville, wondering how much time Doug Peterson has left. Moving into the next group, we have ourselves the struggle bus category. Sitting at number 26, we're looking at the Raiders. At 25, the Miami Dolphins. 24, the New York Giants. 23, the Browns. And at 22, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Raiders sitting at 2-6 right now. Basically, the offensive line just kind of losing the battle in the trenches. You have 5 sacks allowed. You have no real push up front, turning into a situation where you basically have no ability to run the football whatsoever in this game. I do think it is at least worth giving them some credit for hanging around with the Chiefs in this game here and maybe making it a little bit closer than it should have, all things considered. Again, being as one-dimensional as they were, relying on Gardner Minshew to try to will will this team to victory here. You had the 70-yard drive that you took in 3 minutes to make it a one-score game with about 2 minutes left, and if you want to call that garbage time scoring, maybe you could. That would be a fair statement, I would say, to make, but they do get some credit, in my opinion, for at least fighting against a lot of people consider the number one team in the NFL, the potential back-to-back Super Bowl champions in the Kansas City Chiefs, who are currently loading it up. So there is credit for that, but ultimately at 2-6 with the season in kind of dire straits right now for Las Vegas, I have them at the bottom of the struggle bus. At 25, the Miami Dolphins, the defense is something that I feel like maybe has gotten a little bit of a pass over the last few weeks because the offense has just been so dead in the water here, but it is something that has been kind of a concern in the back of my mind, and whether I've brought it up enough or not over the last few weeks, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it is something that has been sitting in the back of my mind, whether I've talked about it or not. But with Tua coming back, it was nice to see him back under center. This offense very clearly operates far better when he is there leading this team. I think it is one of those things where with Tua gone for the time that he did, we saw just how important he was for this Miami Dolphins offense and why they were so willing to pay him as much as he did. This was a vastly different team minus Tua here. So I do think him needing to take some time to knock off the rust maybe ultimately slows down the offense a little bit, but the running game did come back to life because teams have to respect what Tua can do with his arm. And I mean, it was nice to see him throwing the football for Miami, but the weakness, especially over the middle for the defense there in Miami, was showing big time as Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. were giving them problems all game long. It'll be something we have to keep an eye on here, but this was a game that I really thought Miami could come in and win, considering the Arizona Cardinals are like, they're a 500 team themselves and not necessarily the most stacked roster in the NFL at this current point here. I thought they would be able to pull off the victory, but they could not. So now sitting at 2-5, we'll have to see where the Dolphins go from here, but tough position to be in with Tua coming back, game number 1. Giants sitting at 2-6, offensive line, it's suffering. Losing Andrew Thomas really did kill this group, and it was already a group that was in kind of a really tough spot as it was, but ultimately it almost feels like football poetry for the Giants to be in the situation they're in, where the defense is hanging on, the offense is just not doing enough to keep the game within grasp, but the defense doing everything they can to keep it close, and the offense gets 2 opportunities to potentially tie this game up, and you go strip sack and then interception on back-to-back drives from Daniel Jones to put the game away in the loss column for the Giants. I'm very much looking forward to what the Giants do this offseason with the coaching staff, if that winds up being the case, and them keeping Brian Daboll and company around. What happens at the quarterback spot? This team needs more talent on the offensive side of things, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. It's really unfortunate some of the injuries they're dealing with. Azeez Ojulari is stepping up big time with the opportunities that he's getting over there, working alongside Dexter Lawrence and company, but that offense, man, it is just not in a good place right now. Browns sitting at number 23. They actually got a pretty significant jump here, and it's one of the more bizarre things in the NFL of all time, in my opinion, where a team loses their starting quarterback and winds up being better for it, as Jameis Winston, albeit a couple of missed interceptions from the Ravens defense, but 334 yards, 3 touchdowns, a near perfect passer rating. You have got, if you are a Browns fan, I'm sorry that this is the situation that you are in, because it took literally both your starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson tearing his Achilles, and then the backup quarterback that was put behind him because the ownership did not want this conundrum of Jameis Winston potentially coming in and playing better than Watson. Literally the very situation that Cleveland finds themselves in right now, where Jameis Winston puts up the best quarterback performance that this team has possibly had in the last 2, maybe 3 years now. And Joe Flacco had some really good games, but this was a very good, clean game from Jameis Winston. He puts up this type of game, and now the conversation throughout the rest of this season, if Winston continues to play even somewhat like this, is going to be, Do they move on from Deshaun Watson? Is Jameis Winston the guy? Are they going to ride out Jameis Winston and potentially maybe, if not a playoff berth, maybe approach right above 500, at least make things interesting for Cleveland, and then just cut Jameis Winston at the end of the season because, again, they can't afford to have the backup quarterback needing to start over your starting guy in Deshaun Watson conversation again after they did it to Joe Flacco last year. This is one of those crazy things, and I'm curious to see what happens here, but this is ownership of Cleveland, the Haslams, basically being fed their just desserts. Cedric Tillman looked really good. He's had a couple of good back-to-back weeks after Amari Cooper departed via trade. He has 15 receptions for 180 yards and a couple of touchdowns these last two games, with 2 touchdowns coming up this past week. They held Baltimore to their worst rushing performance of the season as well defensively, with only 124 yards on the ground. Still a pretty solid number, but considering what Baltimore has been doing right now, and they are far and away the best rushing offense in the league, you should tip your cap to that by the Browns' effort. But Cleveland, man, just like in one hell of a situation, and if the defense can get back to what it was doing last season, even somewhat, and Jameis Winston is putting up even solid numbers and not what we were getting from Deshaun Watson through the first 7 weeks of this season, the Browns are going to have quite a conundrum on their hands going into the offseason. Bengals sitting at number 22 to round out the struggle bus category, though. Missing T. Higgins obviously hurting the offense big time here, but it really is the defense that I've been harping on for the last few weeks that has just fallen completely flat at this point here. Offense, yes, was struggling, but this defense, especially against the run, has been one of the worst in the league, and they just had no answers for anything that Philadelphia was doing through the air, on the ground. The tush-push, obviously, giving pretty much everybody an issue in the NFL, but Cincinnati just having absolutely no answers, and there's so much going wrong with them right now defensively. I don't know where this team goes from here, but right now, sitting at 3-5, the season is looking really bleak. I went into this game for Cincinnati against Philadelphia thinking, season's kind of on the line. Like, you can't really afford your 5th loss at this point in the season if you consider yourself a playoff team. I'm still erring on the side of the season is not completely over, but pretty much close at this point right now, because Cincinnati has not played well enough to this point for me to completely believe that they can turn the ship around and sneak into the playoffs. Anything's obviously possible, but the defense has been playing so poorly. And if T. Higgins misses an extended period of time, we've seen just how important having Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on the field at the same time is for this offense to be productive. And on top of that, they can't run the football either. There's a lot going on with Cincinnati right now, so I'm worried about them. They're on the struggle bus. They obviously have a bunch of really good guys, but the defense can't stop a nosebleed, and if their offense isn't completely healthy, they're kind of stuck in neutral, and that is concerning to say the least. Moving into the Jeff Fisher category, everyone's favorite category. Those teams floating around the 500 range, a little bit better, a little bit worse, something along those lines. The Colts at number 21 sit at the bottom. The Cowboys are at number 20 at 3-4. Rams at 3-4 at number 19. We got the Cardinals at 500 with 4-4. Bears at 17 after their shocking upset loss after a wild comeback effort on their own part. At number 17, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are sitting at number 16, and then the Seattle Seahawks sitting at the top of the Jeff Fisher category at number 15. Now, when we look at the Colts, Anthony Richardson, 10 of 32 passing this past week. He is the ultimate boom or bust scenario in the NFL. But honestly, the bust is starting to outweigh the boom. And I'll be honest, grew up rooting for the Colts, for those of you that don't know me. Loosely a Colts fan these days. I don't live or die by their success. It doesn't really bother me whether they do well or not. I criticize them honestly more than I do praise them at this point in my fandom, if you want to call it that. I was kind of out on Anthony Richardson coming into the season, and I was kind of on the fence about him even last year. I was excited by what we saw in the limited time that we got, but the 13 starts in college and just the lack of actual play time was something I was always never that okay with. And I was on the side of allowing him to sit. And that's kind of where I stand with a lot of the rookie quarterbacks that come in. There's always the guy or two that's ready to come in, and you can never really find out if they're ready to go unless they go. But I don't really see how it would hurt to let anyone sit, whether it's the number one pick in the draft or Mr. Irrelevant. I don't see how allowing a guy to learn will ever negatively impact them before throwing them into the fire. And Anthony Richardson, with how raw he was, but having all those awesome physical talents, I don't really understand why Indianapolis didn't feel like maybe we should give him some time to learn behind whoever it may have been. I don't know who the option would have been specifically. Obviously, Gardner Minshew was there last season, but maybe if you go into last year thinking we allow Richardson to sit and then take some time to just kind of let the game come to him as he learns from whoever it is you have in front of him. Maybe they're a little bit more serious about pursuing a veteran option during that same free agency window last year. I don't know. I'm worried about his regression this year, and the offense looked better with Joe Flacco under center at this point, and I can't believe that those are words coming out of my mouth in 2024. But the defense played their hearts out to keep the game close. Jonathan Taylor looked really good on the ground, 105 yards with a score, averaging over 5 yards per attempt. I mean, this game was winnable, even with what was a roller coaster of play from Anthony Richardson, but 10 of 32 and his completion percentage, I believe sitting somewhere around like 45% is not going to win you football games consistently. Hence the Colts being 4-4 right now. I don't know what the answer is. I am erring on the side of he needs more time to sit back and learn. But at this point, when you're this far into his career, going through the second year, and you've let him start however many games it's been to this point now, I think he's only missed a game or two this season. I forget, it's blanking on me how many games he's missed this year, if it was just 1 or 2 games. But I mean, at most, he's played, 10 games to this point? Maybe it's 11 if I'm getting that number wrong. I can't really agree with what's going on here in Indianapolis. At number 20, the Cowboys sitting at 3-4. Dak to CD is basically the only offensive threat you really have going for you in Dallas right now. And it's kind of a shame because you have no run game whatsoever. You're paying guys that are just well past their prime at this point, and they're not putting up anything for you. You also can't stop the run whatsoever. Thankfully, your special teams is pretty good, because if you didn't have the special teams thing going for you right now, for all the conversation that was going on surrounding the Patriots and being a soft team because they can't run the football, can't stop the run, and they can't cover kicks, if it wasn't for at least some good special teams play that we've gotten from Dallas, and if you want to argue maybe it hasn't been as great as I think it has been, I mean, that's totally up for debate as well. I'll leave that to you. But, I mean, there is a good conversation that maybe Dallas is a soft team right now. But, I mean, when your offense literally relies on your quarterback to your number one wide receiver week in and week out, it feels like if that's not going to get them to the promised land, they might not win a football game right now. Between defensive injuries on top of all that, things are not looking good for Dallas. Rams at number 19, 3-4. Puka Nacua, surprise entrant into that contest. I did not expect him to play. I don't think a lot of people expected him to play in that Thursday night football game, but he comes in, doesn't even miss a beat. 7 receptions, 106 yards. Cooper Kupp also returns 5 receptions, 51 yards, and a touchdown. Matthew Stafford goes 4 touchdowns. First multi-touchdown game of the season for Matthew Stafford. And the last 6 weeks of play for them, it feels like a distant memory, because this is a completely rejuvenated offense now with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Kupp was obviously in trade conversations, but after this past game, you have to wonder where this Rams team can go, because they've got a lot of young contributors on defense right now. Some of the draft picks from this year's draft, like Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, a lot of production and just a lot of snaps being eaten up by those young guys, and you're getting some good results. Now you have the 2 guys that are going to help that passing game hum again, open things up for Kyren Williams and Blake Corum on the ground. this Rams team could flip the script. The NFC West is wide open. And with the way things looked this past Thursday against one of the best defenses in the NFL right now, with a team that gives everyone problems in the Minnesota Vikings, they finally found their match in a Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua doubleheader against Matthew Stafford as well. I'm very interested to see what this Rams team turns into, because they have some good wins this year, that being one of them. They also have a win over the 49ers as well within the division. I'm very curious to see what happens to the Rams right now, but this was a big jump for them coming out of the struggle bus into the Jeff Fisher category. If this offense that we saw this past week is any indication of what they could look like going forward for the remainder of the season, some teams need to make sure that they are double thinking what they have assumed about the Rams to this point in the season and making sure they're not sleepwalking into a game against them over the next few weeks. Cardinals sitting at number 18 at 4-4, 500 team. The Jeff Fisher definition. Got to keep feeding Marvin Harrison Jr. This guy is so talented. He and Trey McBride, too. I mean, 6 receptions, 111 yards for a touchdown for Harrison Jr. McBride had 9 receptions for 124 yards as well. In a game where defense is not necessarily doing their absolute best on either side, and it came down to who had the football last, the Cardinals. It's a thing of beauty when you get these type of drives as well, because teams have such a hard time executing in this manner. You get a 13-play, 5-minute drive where you are just milking the clock, icing the game, and to come out and bang the game-winning field goal on top of it all. It's not that often that teams execute that type of like finisher in a football game. And it was beautiful from the start of that drive to the very end, as that clock just continued to bleed and bleed and bleed. A 5-minute kill on the clock for a game-winning field goal is not something you get that often. So I tip my cap to what the Cardinals did at the tail end of that football game there. And this was a game where Kyler Murray didn't even really have to do too much damage with his legs. Like, this was him sitting back in the pocket, just kind of wheeling and dealing against the Dolphins defense. And again, as I said earlier, a little bit struggling, I would say, over the middle right now, and they definitely took advantage of that. Bears sitting at number 17. Number one rule of defending the Hail Mary: you bat the football down. You do not tip the football up. You bat the football down. I can't believe we had to sit back after the end of that game and watch those clips going around social media. You're seeing Tyreek Stevenson doing his trash talking to fans all over the stadium, it felt like, towards the end of that game, not really taking the play serious. The play starts, and he's not even looking in the correct direction because he's too busy, jawing at whoever it is he's jawing at. Just not a good look. Saw the apology, glad he's owning up to it and taking ownership and understanding, that's not the time or place to be doing that. You do that once the clock strikes 0 and the game is over, because the game is not over until it is over in the NFL. And Tyreek Stevenson, unfortunately, not paying attention at the start of the play, does not get to the pile until the ball is very much getting to where it's going to in that play, and he winds up being the one that tips the football up into the air right into a Commanders receiver's hands, and ultimately costs the Bears what was a pretty awesome comeback victory late in that football game. Buccaneers sitting at 4-3, the number 16 team here. I will give Tampa Bay some credit in this game, because, not some credit, I think they deserve a fair amount of credit, to be honest with you, for battling the way you do. A lot of conversation going around losing Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, obviously for the season with Godwin, Evans for an extended period of time with that hamstring injury. You got guys like Raheem Jarrett stepping up to the plate, catching a ton of passes from Baker Mayfield, who throws for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, couple of interceptions on top of that ultimately may cost you a potential win in this football game here. But I mean, you're down 31-17 pretty late in the fourth quarter here. Things have not really gone well to this point for you offensively. You take advantage of a fumble that turns into a safety. You drive down for 7, and you're literally still fighting to the very last breath of this football game. It's unfortunate that the Buccaneers are dealing with the injuries that they're dealing with right now, but even with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans in the football game here, there's no guarantee they win this game. I mean, they did lose to the Falcons in overtime just a few weeks ago, but also on top of that, they cannot stop the pass. Like, they need some serious help in that secondary because they can't stop anyone. And Kirk Cousins basically had his way again with this secondary this week. So they've got some work to do on the back end of that defense. But I mean, you're watching Baker Mayfield's leading receivers be K-Dot and Raheem Jarrett, and two running backs between Rachaad White and Bucky Irving being the guys catching all the footballs now. So, like, the workload of your star two wide receivers is basically being divvied out to backup wide receivers, your running backs, and your tight end, who to this point in his career has been like a solid option for you, but has not really blown the top off of defenses or really been that big of an X factor for your offense overall to this point in his career. And then the Falcons rounding out the Jeff Fisher group, sitting at 4-4. This is a Jeff Fisher squad to a T, if you ask me. Like, if I was to pick a team at this point in the season that is like the definitive Jeff Fisher team, it's going to be the Seattle Seahawks at this 4-4 record they're sitting at right now. A team that can go in, they will beat the bad opponents that they should be beating. They will lose to the really good football teams and sometimes lose fairly ugly at that. But every now and again, they'll catch a good team on a bad day and pull out a victory, and sometimes a shocking big victory at that. And that's kind of what I look at with like the game against the Falcons last week, because they went all the way from their home turf to Atlanta to basically blow the Atlanta Falcons last week in their own home stadium. This is one of those things where they're being led by a rookie coach. Injuries have really bit the defense. On top of that, you're dealing with injuries on the offense now as well. This Seahawks team, if they don't finish the season somewhere around like 9-8, 8-9, I'd be legitimately surprised, because that kind of feels like this is where the Seahawks are going to be the remainder of the season. Again, good enough to beat the bad teams, good enough to upset a good team every once in a while, but you see the way that they played against the Bills, it felt like they were clearly outmatched, and last week's game against the Falcons maybe was a bit of an oversight on Atlanta, catching an opponent off at a good moment, everything kind of going your way in that contest as well. Obviously, Walker had a great game last week as well. So we'll see where Seattle goes from here, but they feel like the definitive kind of Jeff Fisher team for me right now. I really like them as the Jeff Fisher like representative. Moving into the playoff hopefuls now, the teams that are, again, either winning their division, in my opinion, to this point, even if they aren't at the top of the division in the standings right now, but the team that I'm expecting to win the division kind of deal. And then also like those wild card teams. There has to be 7 AFC, 7 NFC. There needs to be a division winner from every single division on top of that. And of course, we'll have a couple of wild card teams sprinkled in. Sitting at number 14, we're looking at the San Francisco 49ers. At number 13, we have the Chargers. At number 12, the Eagles. 11, the Broncos. 10, the Falcons. Steelers sit at 9. The Bills are at 8. And then the Washington Commanders sitting at number 7 at the top of this group here. 49ers at 4-4. If they have got to have some sort of like factory that is just kind of producing running backs, because it is bizarre to me that no matter who steps up into that backfield, they wind up being productive as the starter. From even dating back to prior to them getting Christian McCaffrey, like when you had Mostert running wild in that backfield, Elijah Mitchell, and then of course Christian McCaffrey comes in, he takes over the backfield, but then you have guys like Isaac Ruendo, who's been leading the way for the last few weeks, Jordan Mason, who had a really strong start to the season as well. For whatever the reason may be, they are just able to produce running backs, and it feels like it's a given, like death, taxes, and good running back play from the San Francisco 49ers, from somebody. It does not have to be anyone specific, but somebody is going to have a good game running the football for them. Brock Purdy looked good in this game as well. He's had some really weird games this year where he has just thrown a lot of interceptions, but when he's playing clean, he's being smart, and he uses his legs a lot in this game here as well. The 49ers are about as good as they come, even with the injuries that they're dealing with right now. The problem is that they are not consistent. They've had struggles trying to finish games, and those injuries have caught up to them. Again, those mistakes from Brock Purdy that he has been making have really bit them in the you-know-what. So if they can keep the play clean and mistake-free. They do have a ton of turnovers this season, although this was a really clean game for them against the Cowboys. They should find their way into the playoffs, whether it's winning their division or if it winds up being a wild card team because maybe the Arizona Cardinals or like the Rams go on that Cinderella run and maybe steal the division from them. They do have a win over the 49ers already. Something like that could happen, but I feel like the 49ers will probably find themselves in the playoffs in some capacity, and it's either squeaking out that division win or it's like a number 7 seed because, again, they're having struggles finishing. If Christian McCaffrey comes back, a lot of things could change. But sitting at 4-4 right now, I feel good with them at number 14. Chargers sitting at 4-3. Ladd McConkey having himself quite the game. This is kind of like his coming out party. 6 receptions for 111 yards, a couple of touchdowns. He had a nice 60-yard score. Justin Herbert showing off the wheels on a 38-yard run as well. And the defense just kind of giving the Saints a handful. I mean, 5 sacks, it's 6 tackles for loss. You basically forced the Saints' hand in moving from Spencer Rattler over to Jake Haener. You really, like, this was the game that you should have had against a Saints team that was coming in the state that they are currently in right now. So had the Chargers come out with a loss, I would have been extremely shocked, but this was the type of performance, both offensively and defensively, that you should have been having against the Saints team that is just completely down and out right now. The Eagles sitting at 5-2. Philadelphia might be all the way back. It does not feel that long ago that there was the conversation around Nick Sirianni and his job security, but this game against the Bengals team that felt like they were finding their footing and storming their way back to potentially being like a legit AFC playoff team, they come in and they shut things down 37-17. And like I said when we were talking about the Bengals, I mean, if Philadelphia could really do no wrong here. They were winning on the ground. They were winning through the air. I think Jalen Hurts had 4 incompletions. He was like 16 for 20 in the game. So you really could not do much wrong. And for a defense in Philadelphia that's kind of had some roller coaster moments so far this season, looked really good. Again, T. Higgins not in the thick of things, so it does help out a secondary that can be a little bit leaky at times over there in Philadelphia, but has overall been pretty good this year. Guys like Quinion Mitchell, who were brought in this season, obviously look really good coming out of the draft. And it feels like with each and every passing week, the Philadelphia Eagles are more and more finding themselves and recapturing that form that they had prior to the collapse last season. I'm hoping that I'm not speaking too soon, but that kind of feels like the direction the Eagles are heading in right now. NFC East, I would argue, is somewhat up for the taking because right now, with how close Washington was to losing that game just this past week, there could have been a good opportunity that Philadelphia is leading the division, but there is an opportunity to still win here. And you have games coming up against Washington where you can prove yourself to potentially steal that division. So I don't want to say it's wide open in the NFC East right now because the Giants and the Cowboys, I would be shocked to see them steal this division at this point as well. But you are right in the thick of it with Washington. So keep trending in the right direction. I like what we're seeing from Philadelphia, and this was a really good win because not only was it a win over a team that was kind of getting hot, but also it was a dominant win in the fact that you won by 20. Falcons sitting at 5-3. In my notes, I literally have what is up with this team. It's crazy because you have them dumping 30 points on 3 of their last 4 opponents. The defense, depending on the week, is either pretty good to sometimes kind of bad, but then you have like the performance you got from them against Seattle last week. They had their fair share of mistakes this week as well. You had the fumble safety. Kyle Pitts almost had a touchdown called back because the ball got knocked out of his hands, and honestly, the ruling on the field stood, but if there was a better camera angle of that Kyle Pitts touchdown, there's probably a turnover there. If like that's a Sunday night football game, you have the sideline angle you need to maybe get that called back because it kind of looked like that ball was knocked out before he crossed the goal line. So I don't know what to make of Atlanta right now, but I do know they lead the NFC South. It is their division to lose, very much so at this point here with the injuries that Tampa Bay have been dealt with their second win over Tampa Bay, as I talked about going into that game. Very hard to beat the same opponent twice in a season. Division rivals, obviously no exception to that rule. To be able to come in and knock them out again, this time on their home turf, big victory there, really opens up the gap between you and the rest of the division here. They're in the lead for their division. They have a ton of skill talent. Kirk Cousins has looked really good this season for them. I feel like every single week that goes by, it looks like he's more and more comfortable with the offense here. But that defense has got to get it together. They cannot generate any pressure. They do not get a ton of, very many sacks, if at all. Like, there is definitely some imperfections to this team, but they are the best of the South right now, and they have a fairly loaded offense filled with talent. And when they're humming, this offense can duel, in my opinion, with the best of them. Steelers sitting at 6-2. Special teams for Pittsburgh over the last few weeks, honestly making a case for best group in the NFL right now. Between the blocked field goals, Calvin Austin had a punt return touchdown this week. He also had a receiving touchdown as well. Of course, TJ Watt doing his thing. He and Alex Highsmith are such a phenomenal pairing coming off the edges of the defense for them. It's a different unit when Alex Highsmith is running with TJ Watt. Completely different pairing when they're in versus when they're not right now. And so TJ Watt doing his thing, strip sack, recover to ultimately set up the Giants in a position where they should have lost the game. Offense obviously gives the ball back for one final drive. Pick ends the game, but TJ Watt, nonetheless, doing TJ Watt type things. This defense just continues to suffocate opponents. And I have to concede something about the Steelers right now, because this is something that I was concerned about with the change being made, and I talked about it last week, but I think I need to double down on the owning up to being wrong on this. Russell Wilson was the right choice. The offense has definitely opened up. George Pickens, with the way Russell Wilson is throwing to him right now, that's going to be a pairing to watch during the stretch of this season here. And it almost kind of like benefits Russell Wilson that he stepped in and had the opportunity to get into the rhythm that he's gotten into with the last two opponents for the Steelers, because now he hasn't played the first 6 weeks of the season, whatever it was that he didn't play. He's a little bit fresher than most of the guys that have been getting beaten up for the first third of the season. So there's a lot of good that's coming from this right now. One, the offense looks good. It looks even better. It looks more fluid. There are some, still some moments of settling for three that we need to get rid of in the first half of that football game. But, there's a good chance that if the Pittsburgh Steelers converted, another touchdown as opposed to a field goal the way they did in that first half, they absolutely run away with this game. And it's not nearly as close as it was towards the end there. But ultimately, between the defense and just how good the offense is looking right now, Pittsburgh's really hot. Bills at 6-2. Josh Allen finally turning the football over 8 weeks into the season here. But ultimately, this was a great Bills win from top to bottom. Buffalo really looks like a legitimate contender in the league right now. But my problem is their losses. It's the losses that scare me from calling them a Super Bowl contender right now. But they are beating up on the bad teams that they should be beating up on. And if they didn't have such an ugly loss to Baltimore, for example, I would feel better about this Bills team right now. But I am a little bit on the fence as far as calling them a legit Super Bowl contender right now. If Amari Cooper can integrate himself into the offense a little bit more, and we're talking 4 or 5 weeks down the road, he's a more consistent presence here, not just kind of opening things up for other guys in the offense, I think I'll have a different opinion on that. But right now, Josh Allen, MVP candidate. James Cook, another 100-yard game for him, couple of tutties on the ground. Defense completely shut down the run, made Seattle look like they had no idea what they were doing on the ground. And in the second half, Seattle's opening drive turns into an interception. They go down, they score, makes the game 24-3. You force the Seahawks to basically just have to throw the football each and every single play, and that's not a position you want to be in against Buffalo right now, and they get the job done. So Buffalo's looking really good right now. Not quite ready to call them a legit Super Bowl contender at this current moment here, but I do like what they're doing. And then to round out the group at number 7, the Commanders at 6-2. The Hail Mary. Obviously, can't go without talking about that. But the big thing for me really is just the toughness, the grit, the will to succeed in Jaden Daniels to come in and play through this rib injury here. I did not think he was going to play in this game, and it seemed like a lot of people didn't expect him to play in this game. He wound up being a game-time decision. He ultimately goes. He racks up 378 total yards of offense for this team. He was like the entirety of the offense in this game here with his arm and his legs. Scored a touchdown on top of that. But the other thing that I'm really starting to pick up on here, and At this point, I've been on the fence about this defense for a while now, but you have 5 of the 8 games this season where you've allowed 20 points or less, and some of those higher scoring numbers were against some better opponents offensively. This defense might really be starting to turn a corner here because they've looked pretty good over the last few weeks. And again, the higher point totals that they let up were against pretty good offensive teams. So at this point now, Washington's really starting to look like a team that I can believe in. Your quarterback, rookie at that, is willing to come in, hurt and in pain, and still put up the numbers he puts up, heaves a Hail Mary throw that ultimately, a little bit of luck involved, winds up working out, helps you steal a victory. The Commanders are doing all the right things right now. They're close with the teams that they've lost to, and they're beating everybody else on top of that. 6-2 right now, not a bad place to be. You've hit on a lot of signings, draft picks, you name it. Washington has done a lot right, and it has been a long time since words like that have come out of my mouth right now. And again, the only thing that I am keeping Washington out of the Super Bowl contention club for is because I just need that marquee victory over like a legit team. That is the only thing holding me back right now. I want that marquee win before I thrust them into Super Bowl contention conversation. So they stay at number 7, right outside looking in, but I'll stay with what I've been saying for the last few weeks. I need that marquee victory. And then moving into the Super Bowl contenders, this is actually the only group this week that did not change. There was a lot of consideration that went into all of this, but the Texans still at 6, Packers still at 5, Ravens still at 4, Vikings 3, Lions 2, Chiefs 1. Again, no movement in my Super Bowl contenders club. Closer game than you would like against the Indianapolis Colts for the Texans here, but a win is a win against a division rival. AFC South games, especially the Texans-Colts, for whatever the reason is, historically, those games are always just like this. They're always very tight, very tough contests, regardless of who the better team is in those contests. Joe Mixon had another 134 yards, got a touchdown as well. Stephon Diggs signing is clearly paying off for this team right now. I'm very curious to what this team would be like since Nico Collins has been down with an injury, what the offense would be if Stephon Diggs wasn't in there, because essentially you lose Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs kind of just slots right into your number 1 role, and he takes the Nico Collins role over. But I mean, they've looked so good, and this is without Nico Collins. Like when he comes back and this offense is in full force, because they didn't have Joe Mixon basically the entire time Nico Collins was playing, this offense could be a scary unit. The defense continues to be good. And, I mean, 5 sacks, you had 10 passes defensed here. Granted, you're going against Anthony Richardson, who, throws the football in crazy places. But, I mean, just overall, I still like the Texans. I still think they're one of the best in the AFC right now. But at number 6, I'm fine with them here because, they have losses to the Packers and the Vikings, who I have above them right now. I do buy the Ravens more than them currently as it stands. I think that they are the second best team in the AFC right now. Baltimore Ravens, that is, even with their loss to the Browns, and we'll get into that in a second, but I like Texans as the third best in the AFC, sitting at number 6. Packers at 5, Josh Jacobs continues to earn his paycheck over there, another 25 carries for 127 yards and a couple of scores on the ground here, really putting the team on his back in this game here, especially after Jordan Love goes down with an injury, and I've got to shout out Malik Willis. Malik Willis has earned himself an opportunity somewhere, in my opinion. The rumors that were going around about him not getting starting reps while he was in Tennessee and being forced to start regardless of that fact is crazy to me, and I don't know if that is true or not, but it is something that I've seen in a couple of different places now. If that really is the case, and Malik Willis, what we got from him earlier in the season when he was getting the starting reps and leading this team to victory, and then stepping in here, nice scoring drive, 5 of 6 completions, like, you have to tip your cap to what Malik Willis has been able to do in relief of Jordan Love. Now, granted, the offense over there, pretty good, to say the least, I would, about the Green Bay Packers, but this is the third time now that the Packers have been in a situation where they're not playing with Jordan Love under center, and it's the third time that they've won that football game. So they have got a legit team over there. Defense continues to be leaky, but the offense is uber talented, and they're still winning football games even when their starting quarterback isn't under center for them. The Ravens at number 4, I weighed dropping them extremely heavily. But when I look at Baltimore and their loss to the Cleveland Browns, the things that really haunt me, and I'm sure are haunting Baltimore right now, are that dropped interception that Jameis Winston basically threw straight to a Raven that should have lost them the football game. And then the other thing that is just sitting in the back of my mind that I still can't believe happened was that Rashad Bateman drop that was, Lamar Jackson being able to escape and get himself in a position to even get that football out to begin with, and then to just have it flat out dropped. It's those two things are just kind of like replaying in my head over and over and over again in regards to that loss here. The Ravens have two of the like uglier losses this season, in the sense that you lost to teams you shouldn't be losing against, and you still had pretty damn good days altogether despite the fact that you lost. And then of course you have the like toenail loss to the Chiefs at the beginning of the season here. But this is a Ravens team sitting at 4-3, and I'm not trying to make excuses for them. It's just my opinion. This is a 4-3 Ravens team that should be 5-1. They should not have dropped the ball the way they had against the Raiders a handful of weeks ago. This is another game that they should not have lost to the Cleveland Browns. The secondary and just their inability to defend the pass is something of an issue and is something to keep an eye on. But you had two like back-to-back sequences where you had that opportunity to put the game away and then come back and ultimately not lose that football game with the Rashad Bateman drop. They should have won that football game. I don't want to take anything away from Cleveland. It's a team effort, and they deserve that win because they did get it. But my God, did it feel like the Ravens gave that football away, or that football game away, rather. I still like them as the second best in the AFC. I wouldn't take another AFC team aside from the Chiefs over them at this current point right now, even with the imperfect nature of the Chiefs offensively. But man, that's a tough loss. Vikings sitting at number 3 at 5-2. For as good as Minnesota has been, good quarterbacks are beating them. Jared Goff last week went for 280 yards. Matthew Stafford this week, 279. And they are currently one of the highest in terms of passing yards per game allowed right now in the league. I forget what the actual number is they rank, but they are in the top 5. If not, they might even be the top 3. But their struggles to finish drives, and also you have some highs and lows from Sam Darnold every single week. Offensive line losing Christian Darrisaw is going to compound that issue a little bit further, because Darrisaw, in my opinion, one of the top left tackles in the NFL, not named Trent Williams. And so there are things that are scaring me about Minnesota right now that could wind up being the catalyst for more losses. But I still think this is a very good football team. Love what they're doing defensively, but they are prone to letting teams get behind them because of how aggressive they are. And if this offensive line regresses now, minus Christian Darrisaw, that could be where, floodgates maybe start to open in terms of Sam Darnold and some of the issues that we've seen from him in his career, because his issues against pressure, and obviously being pressured a lot while he was in New York, was one of the big reasons, that was like the whole seeing ghosts type of thing. I don't think the offensive line is just going to completely fall off a cliff in Minnesota, but we have seen crazier things. And I mean, I go back to earlier in the season, and this is a different situation, but it started with the Saints losing center Eric McCoy. And from that point forward, I even said, I don't think that their offense is going to fall off a cliff losing him. But then the offense kind of fell off a cliff, and that was their center, never mind a star left tackle like Christian Darrisaw. So we'll see what happens with the Vikings. I'll hold at 3 right now. They're still 5-2. They have wins over the Packers and, a lot of the teams beneath them, aside from the Lions being the one NFC team ahead of them. But I still think that they're one of the better teams in the league at this point. The Lions at 6-1. Jared Goff, I mean, in what world do you throw for 85 yards and 3 touchdowns? I don't really know, but here we are. The amount of just short fields that you got set up with your defense being so opportunistic, being able to get in, score those touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had the 70-yard run. You have your running back throwing a touchdown in David Montgomery. You get a punt return touchdown from Khalif Raymond. I mean, everything was going right for Detroit, offensively and defensively. Short field setups, you're taking advantage of them, scoring touchdowns. You're getting big one-play scores between the punt return and that 70-yard run from Gibbs, like I mentioned. The Lions have everything going correctly for them at this current moment. Like the Aiden Hutchinson thing is the one kind of dark cloud looming over Detroit at this current moment here, and they're still not really generating a ton of pressure, nor are they really getting the sacks without Aiden Hutchinson, and that was already a problem with him being there. I'm curious to see if there ends up being a move made by Detroit over the next few days going into the trade deadline next week on the 5th, but right now, as it stands, Detroit is de facto number one in the NFC. They are just so good right now, and they are a tough-ass football team is the way I kind of look at it. They are just... They will go at you until the final whistle. They do not let up, and whatever your opinion on that is your own, but for me, I like that. I am very much of the group. If you want them to stop doing that to you, you've got to stop them. And I love the aggressiveness coming out of Detroit. I'm here for it. You as a defense and you as a football team need to stop your opponent, not expect them to let up on you because you've kind of just keeled over and let them have their way. So I don't blame Detroit for doing what they're doing. I like it. If I was an offensive coordinator, it's what I would be doing. And then the Chiefs sitting at number 1 at 7-0. Another week, another win for them. Great game up front for them, from the defensive line to some of the linebackers as well. They finished the day with 5 sacks and 7 tackles for loss as a defense here. And this is good for a team that has really struggled to generate consistent pressure and get after the quarterback and bring them down. They go and they trade for Josh Uche yesterday as well, so that's going to be big for them as well. 33 rushing yards allowed. This is a team that is winning through the defense, and the offense is making just enough happen that they're coming away victorious. They're not winning by a lot. Some of the games are ugly offensively. Somehow, some way, betting places still have Patrick Mahomes in the MVP conversation, even though he has not looked great this season, other than his team being 7-0. I don't really know how you could put him in there. That feels like a trap bet for casuals that don't really know what's going on in the football league, and they just hear Patrick Mahomes and go, yeah, I'll bet $20 on him kind of deal. But with DeAndre Hopkins coming in, things are going to open up for Travis Kelce, Xavier Worthy and company, and you already kind of saw that this week as well. It's not like Hopkins had a massive role in the game, but Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce are both benefiting just from his presence being on the football team and on the football field, and teams having to respect his presence, and that being DeAndre Hopkins' presence on the field at all times. So I'm excited to see how that expands the offense a little bit further. But for right now, Chiefs are getting it done. They're winning every single week. Only undefeated team left, and they're sitting at 7-0. I don't know what else you want from me. They are the team that has not lost. And I again, and I've said this a handful of times, I took the Chiefs off of the number 1 spot for 1 week this season, and I regret doing that because at this point, I wish I never did. They are the team that has not lost. They are the champions. To be the best, you got to beat the best. Ric Flair said that, and I quote that all the time about the Kansas City Chiefs. It is what it is with KC. Those are my power rankings, though. Ranking everyone from worst to first through some tier lists. Let me know in the comment section down below. What am I getting right? What am I getting wrong? Fire away in that comment section. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.